Good day, everybody. This is again Markus Van Aardt, Authentic Business Communication, and I'm coming at you with delivery number 3. This is really lesson number 3 in a series of videos that I'm shooting. And today the lesson is called Communicating Clearly Under Pressure. So for those of you who have followed thus far, you will have probably noticed that in my first 2 deliveries, I spoke primarily about the importance of knowing your environment, knowing what you're heading into as you come to Canada and as you start to launch a brand new career here. So some of those concerns. But today I want to get into the substance of how do you comport yourself in interviews and so forth. And so we're getting a little bit more deeply into content now. The milestones that I want to cover today are a few. So first of all, talking about the differing needs between you as a communicator and the listener, typically an interviewer or somebody that you want to network with. So as you would know, you're under a great deal of pressure, say in an interview, and the other person is not. And that puts you in a really tough situation from a stress perspective, and we're going to see how that impacts you and also then how you can deal with that. Secondly, we're looking at in what form does that pressure come to you? What does it look like in a behavioral interview content? And then thirdly, I'm going to chat with you a little bit about the mental, the physical, and the behavioral impact that you need to watch out for and that you need to be aware of so that you can address it effectively. Then I'm going to get into how you have control over how other people perceive you. Because there is truly control over how other people perceive you if you truly know what you're doing. And I'm going to end off on a really issue number 1 in how other people perceive you, and that is clarity of speech, which is so incredibly important. So I hope you enjoy this and follow along with me, and here we go. So on the slide that you see right now, I'm introducing the whole idea of a disparity between speaker and listener. And the disparity lies in the field or in the area of the fact that the speaker, the interviewee, knows that they are being assessed. That alone already introduces a dynamic in a conversation. You know, an interview isn't really a conversation or the kind of conversation that we all want to have. It is tense, it's filled with tension, it is filled with anticipation and so forth. But you will notice that at the bottom left of the slide, it shows that your needs as a communicator in an interview are really urgent. They are urgent because you've got bills to pay, you've got a career to launch. And as the slide mentions, you know, you want to get noticed, you want to show your value, you want to be articulate, you want this connection with this person to sustain over time, right? Now, contrast that with a listener, the interviewer, for argument's sake, or even if you're just having a quick coffee chat with somebody in your field with whom you would like to connect. That person, they're, in a way of speaking, their bucket is full already. Their needs are met, generally speaking. They're employed, they've got a car in the driveway, a mortgage, kids in school, etc. And they've got other priorities. On top of that, they might be very busy. So you are not their primary concern necessary for that day. So they appear relaxed and potentially disengaged. And when this occurs, you, of course, notice this. And not only do you notice it, but it starts to have an impact on how you behave and how you think. Maybe the other way around. First, how you think, and then how you behave as a consequence. So it is my job today to give you a preview of what a typical behavioral interview looks like in the Canadian context based on my years of experience with clients. And, because forewarned means that you are more ready to face any situation if you at least know what you're going to be heading into. So, high level, the behavioral questionnaire, to my mind, can be divided into four main areas. You can see on the slide in front of you now that you get situational questions, story questions, logistical questions, and so-called curveball questions. But there are also different interview types seen centrally in the slide. So you might face a screening interview over the phone, or a hiring manager on his or her own, or other stakeholders in the organization, but they might also put them together in a panel. And I see that quite a bit nowadays on Zoom interviews and so on, where they put an entire panel together virtually and you're interviewing with 3 or 4 people at one time. Very, very pressure filled. Now, there can also be technical interviews, just purely technical, dependent on your career, your profession. And then there's normally a final, typically sort of a senior HR type interview that talks to you about onboarding. Now, we'll get into those interview types later on in the series. But today, I want to give you a preview of the kind of questions that you might face. So, it's important to understand that there is a difference between a situational question and a story question. A situational question is a question where they sketch the scenario for you. So for argument's sake, they might say to me, as if I were interviewing Markus, I see that you're very experienced in projects such as X, Y, and Z, but in our company, we frequently run projects in parallel. So if you're successful in this interview process and we hire you, you will most likely be responsible and accountable for 2 to 3 interviews at any given time. That's the scenario. Tell us a little bit about how well do you manage pressure? And secondly, talk to us a little bit about your approach to time management. So can you see that was a situation sketched for me? And now I have to respond to, hypothetically, how I would deal with that. On the other side of the slide, you see story questions. Now, story questions come at you in this form. They say, so tell me about. They really want an actual occurrence that you've lived through, that you need to deliver as a story to them of 2 years ago, I faced this situation, here is what I did, and these were the outcomes, and this is what I learned from it. Completely different delivery. Bottom right on the slide, you see logistical questions. Folks, they are easy. They're sort of yes-no questions about when you can start, whether you're open to virtual work, to relocation, etc. Not a big deal. Not a great deal of technique. But then you get the fourth one, and this is a nightmare for most of my clients. I call them curveball questions because they don't come straight at you. And secondly, there's no right or wrong to answering that question. It is that they want to hear your perspective on numerous topics, such as, tell me about yourself. What is your 5-year plan? Things like, what do you know about us as a company? What inspired you to apply for this role specifically? What are your strengths and weaknesses? These curveball questions produce an inordinate amount of stress in my clients normally. And I do a lot of work to help them deal with it. So this is not to scare you. This is to give you a reality check in terms of how busy behavioral interviews can become. And as a consequence, how incredibly stress-filled they might be for you. So, speaking of stress, I think it's time then to move on to talk about what happens with you mentally, physically, emotionally when you face a stress situation. Because if we understand what happens to us, folks, then we know what we have some control over and what we don't have control over. So you can stop wasting your time with the wrong things and focus on the right things, correct? So the slide that I'm showing you now shows that on the left there are three things. And they happen almost instantaneously and in conjunction with each other. You perceive pressure. Well, no surprise, you're in an interview and you really, really want this job. At the same time, when we perceive pressure, we become hyper alert. And the hyper alertness is very often fear focused. So it is, what should I not do wrong? What should I not make a mistake with? How are they viewing me? How are they assessing my progress here? And we are very, very strict with ourselves, and our hyper alertness is very often fear focused. And then the third thing that occurs is your body gets into the game as well, and it sends you stress signals like sweaty palms. You might blush. You might feel that your heart rate is higher. You might have butterflies in your stomach. And so when that occurs, the loop is complete. You know you're in trouble. You suspect you're not doing well, and your body is confirming that you need to get yourself out of this. And that injects into your mind what I call noise. Useless, rowdy, noisy information about just how poorly you're doing. So downstream from that, you can see that if we can't contain the noise in our heads, it has impacts on two performative elements. And the performative elements is of course what the interviewer watches and listens to, right? Number one, the first performative element that it impacts is your logic and your language gets scrambled. People speak in non-stop sentences, circular arguments. They find the first idea in their head and they believe that they'll build on it as they go. Wrong, you're mistaken. And number two, your behavior when you're under pressure tends to become a little bit more self-protective. You become a little bit quieter, and very often you start speaking faster like a really nervous person. Your hand movement and your eye contact might also suffer. So there is good news about this slide. The good news is that you don't focus on the fact that you perceive pressure, that you feel hyper alert, and that your body is playing tricks on you. You also don't focus on the noise in your head. You give your brain, your mind, something productive to focus on. And what you do is you give your mind a job to take care of the logic and the language. And that is what a major part of this course is all about. How do I structure my logic and my language? And also, you give your very busy mind the task of focusing on how do I comport myself like a confident person. The whole idea is that if you induce confident behaviors by choice, deliberately, you start to feel like you're doing well, and then the noise starts to hush in your own mind. This is not my opinion. This has been proven over and over again in a decade where I've worked with clients like yourselves. And there's actually also scientific research that your behavior changes how you think and feel about yourself if you choose the right behaviors. So I want to then get to this piece. I just told you that you can actually pick your behaviors and that you can make yourself feel better while you're performing, say in an interview, by doing the right things. Now, what are those things? And this is what I have come up with over a few years, done a lot of thinking about this. The first thing is that you can change how other people perceive you. That is an absolute fact. And also the way that people perceive you is also going to influence how they treat you as a consequence, right? So the three elements that I work with my clients are the following three. Number one, let's get you to be clear when you speak. Clarity is of utmost importance. Number two, when you explain complex ideas, can you be concise yet compelling at the same time? And that is a fairly tough order, right? Concise yet compelling, but it can be done if you organized your ideas really well. If you know not only what you want to say, but how you want to say it. That is a phrase that I use very, very frequently with my clients. And then the third thing is you influence the perception of others of you by engaging them in conversation. So to be memorable is to engage the other person in such a way that they don't just feel talked at, but spoken with, right? So this little triangle structure, I'll come back to that quite frequently in subsequent videos. But today, as a final piece to my video, I'm going to focus just on clarity, how to be clear. And as you can see on the slide, to be clear, in my mind, consists of three things at least. I'm not saying there aren't others. But number one, separate your words from each other. The second thing is finish the words that you speak, don't swallow the ends. And number three, it is overall pace, which implies emphasis on certain words, pauses between certain phrases, etc. And the benefits are very observable, very immediately as you execute. The benefits are that number one, your clarity improves and you hear that and you feel good and the noise subsides. Number two, you get more nods per sentence, so to speak, because you make so much sense that the other person follows along and they give you these micro hints that you're doing well. Noise subsides. And number three, of course, it imbues you with confidence so that when you tackle the next question, you feel, I'm on a good road here and I'm going to do well. So to break down clarity a little bit further for you, I wrote a few examples of what clarity actually sounds like. And these are examples that you can take. You've got the video now, you can replay this piece. But I encourage that you put on a recorder. Just record yourself on your phone and read some of these sentences and look out for what I'm going to recommend to you. Number one, separate your words. To separate your words means that you finish the word before you start the next one so that they don't tumble over each other. And I wrote this little piece and I'm going to read it for you now with focus on separating my words. And you can hear how I do it. Now I know that I am perhaps dramatizing things a little bit, for the purpose of this video, and you don't have to sound like me, but your accent can become an asset if you are clear. And step number one is to separate your words so that I can hear them each by each. Even if you have a fairly strong accent, but you are clear by separating your words, people love listening. So read this for yourself and record yourself and play it back and see if you're doing what I'm doing. Yesterday, I strolled in the park, thinking about the upcoming video and what may be in store for viewers worldwide. Regardless of content, I'm confident that at least I will be able to share some new ideas. So can you hear that I'm executing my words really deliberately, one by one, and I truly pay attention to the execution of each. Finish each word is the second part. And that means that when we speak a new language, like English is maybe a second language for you, most likely, we very often execute a sort of a facsimile of what we hear other people say. But you can pay more attention to the word by finishing the word completely. And I'm talking about the consonants at the end of words. They are really, really important to the English ear. So examples: memorable, deliberate, articulation, contingent, on consonants, vowels, emphasis on the correct syllable. Can you hear that I finished the entire word? I often speak with my clients about swallowing their words. And when you swallow the word, my ear is still busy figuring out what on earth you said there, and you're way down the line in the sentence. And so you inject noise into my head as a listener by not finishing your words. I am not going to talk specifically about language groups, but there are language groups that rely more on vowel sounds in their language than on consonants. And in English, in spoken English, consonants, in my experience, really play a huge role in clarity. So those T's, those D's, those S's, those P's, the R's, and so forth really, really matter, especially towards the end of a word. And then the last thing is overall pace. Now, you could call that pace and emphasis, or pace and undulation, because you do want to speak in such a way that you lead the listener to what is key or important in what you just said. And that is by raising the pitch a little bit. So the overall idea is to speak well-paced, like you mean what you want to say. As the little script says, and I mean this quite literally, confident people take their time because they know that what they have to say matters. Can you hear that I'm emphasizing certain words? I'm pacing myself, finishing my words, small pauses, there's a little bit of a rise and a fall, but I take my time because I want you to hear what I'm saying, and that really matters. You don't always, folks, in interviews, have to have the perfect answer. But if you deliver an answer well, it comes across as authentic. Why? Because it comes across as well considered. And any employer is willing to work with somebody who thinks before they act, with somebody who tries to give the best information when asked a question. This already sets you up for tremendous success in an interview, and we haven't even delved into the content of the interview yet. This is just delivery. Clarity matters every single time, because people who speak clearly are people who come across as confident. People who come across as confident come across as reliable. So these are behavioral tips. I hope that you enjoyed this. Now, I would just like to ask you, if you enjoyed this video, this is not just for me. Of course, I'm trying to build a channel, but leave that alone. If you enjoyed this, like it, because by liking and also subscribing, the channel becomes more visible to those people that need these tips and tricks. And if you feel particularly generous, you can also share it with people in your network. I would really appreciate that. And I'm inviting you to come back to my channel. I'm going to be loading probably 1 to 2 videos per week henceforth. And we're going to move along quite swiftly. This was lesson 3. Lesson 4 will be split into 2 parts. And that is about being concise and compelling. I wish you a wonderful day. And please come back. I love chatting with you. All the very best. Goodbye.